Good morning. Good morning. This is my Sunday school class. My name is Douglas Griffin. I apologize in advance to everyone who's thinking I'm going to be 10 minutes late. Just by accident, I'm on time. Hello to Skinner Horton, who is watching because she likes to be on time. Um, we are in the book of Leviticus. I go through the Bible verse by verse by verse by verse by verse. Genesis, we did Exodus, now we're in Leviticus, and won't be long before we're going to be, because I'm doing a chapter at a time. Uh, Sometimes in Genesis, it would take 4 weeks to get through one chapter because there was so much there, but I'm trying to just go through uh, Leviticus so we can get to Numbers, Deuteronomy, etc. We're just going to keep going. Okay. Oh, see, and I knew Susie would be there too. Hi, Susie. Um, I'm going to Leviticus chapter 19. I'm going to skip Leviticus 18 until next week. Because I really have to pray about how to teach Leviticus chapter 18 and 20, because there's a certain teaching, theological teaching, that's really been hammered into our church that's not correct. It's not purposely incorrect, it's just not correct. Um, and again, by looking at the context, you can say, oh, that's what that person meant by that when you hear the whole context. Hi, well, good morning, everybody. When you hear the whole context, then it's easier to say, oh, that's what that means. And so that's why I go verse by verse. I'm skipping to Leviticus chapter 19. Next week, I'll teach 18 and 20. Teaching 19, because you won't believe what I tell you about 18 until you hear 19 and you go, well, if that's true in 19, it's got the same thing's got to be true in 18 and 20, because you'll believe 19. You'll look at things in 19 and go, well, obviously that's what he's talking about. And all I'm saying is he's talking about the same thing in 18 and 20 as he's talking about in 19. God is not schizophrenic. He doesn't get lost or confused. It's not non sequiturs and just suddenly starts talking about his aunt in Poughkeepsie and then he gets back to how to get to the restaurant. He's telling one story. Sometimes it's obvious, and sometimes you just have to look at the other. Well, good morning, James. Sometimes you have to look at the other scriptures. So you should like this. Anyway, so Leviticus 19. I just want to remind us why he's writing the book of Leviticus in the first place. So, uh, God brings the children of Israel out of Egypt, but they don't know him. They do not know him. They've been in Egypt for 200 years watching the Egyptians worship their gods, and that's what they've learned. There's no temple, Jewish temple in Egypt. There's no synagogue in Egypt. They only know what they see every single day. All the huge statues to gods all around them, all this pageant and ceremony, and naturally that's what they think they're supposed to do. And they've heard about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they just figure he's one of the gods. But they haven't heard from him lately. And surely they've been there for 200 years, and if he really existed, he would have helped them by now. But these gods, they bring rain, they bring locusts, they they're the god of the mountain, they make the flowers grow. I mean, they see and they've been told God has to bring them out and retrain them. In Exodus chapter 19, once he's brought them out, he says, now therefore, if you will indeed, Exodus chapter 19, verse 5. If you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for the earth is mine. So if you obey and do what I'm about to tell you, then you'll be unique. This is what's going to make you unique from all those other nations, because the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Persians, everybody else worshiped all these different gods and came up with really crazy ways to worship God because none of their gods were real. They were never corrected. Somebody could say, you know what would be a good way to worship God? If we cut ourselves on our arms and let our hair grow wild, or if you're just bald, and then God will like us because you know God is bald. Who was there to go, well, that's not true? How would that? Sounds good to me. And then they go and do it, and then the next day it would rain. See, I shaved my head and I ran naked through the cornfield, and then it rained the next day. That must, and I'm telling you, that's how people came up with stuff. They do a crazy thing, and then the river would flood, and they would think, I caused that. People think that now. Go to a basketball game or go to a baseball game. Put on your rally hats. I made him strike out. I said, "Oh, I, I wore my lucky jersey, and that's why that guy missed that free throw." We believe that today. Don't try to tell somebody. You got to sit exactly here. The last time our team won, you were sitting in the armchair, and we had popcorn, and that's why I don't change my underwear because it's the same underwear when I struck out 19 people. And we believe that the little things that we do cause other things to happen. That's why our team won the Super Bowl. And so you can imagine how they believed 4,000 years ago. And so they made up crazy stuff that they thought, and there no God stepped down to correct them because none of those gods were real. So this is all that the children of Israel are learning. That's all that they know for 200 years in Egypt. So God brings them out. It says, you know what will make you different from all these other nations who believe this crazy stuff? If you worship me in this way and do these things. He says, then you'll be a special treasure to me above all the people, for the earth is mine. I'm really the actual God. Verse 6 of Exodus 19, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. You'll be a kingdom of priests. You'll be able to, and thereby, because they knew what the priest was. The priest was the mouthpiece between God and man. Well, all of you will be a kingdom of priests. You'll be able to show God to the world. I'll use you in that way as a people. All of you will be that way. You'll be a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So he gives them the 10 commandments. The first 5 commandments are how to worship him. These are the ways to worship me. And then the second 5 commandments are how to treat your neighbor. Why is that important? Because you're going to treat your neighbor, besides just the worship of God that's different, the way that these people treated strangers was horrific. All these other nations, strangers would come in and they would rape them and rob them and kill them. And that's how you treated other nations. Of course, in our country, anyway, uh, there was a way that God says, this is how you must treat the stranger. This is how you must treat the poor. This is how, and this will make you different from all other nations, right? That's why we, on the Statue of Liberty, we said, bring me you're tired, you're hungry, longing to be free. We're trying to be different. We don't kill people when they show up on our shore. Okay, anyway. So, but that's what God said. These 2 things will make you different. You're going to worship me differently. And then the second half of the 10 Commandments, and you're going to treat people differently. Now, he didn't say, so let's look at the 10 Commandments. Because these are the only universal laws that are in the Old Testament that apply for all time. The other laws that he gave in Leviticus are very specific to don't be like them. You know how they braid their hair? Don't braid your hair. Now, he's not making a universal law for all time. Don't ever braid your hair. He's trying to make them different than how they worship their gods. So don't pick up their habits. It's very specific. But these first 10 laws, they're universal, and they're the only ones that are universal. The reason I'm saying this is because we've taken very specific laws in the book of Leviticus and tried to make them universal, and they aren't. Okay, in Exodus chapter 20, when he steps down and gives the 10 commandments, he says, verse 2, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. I'm just reminding you who I am. I'm the one who brought you out. So, first, you shall have no other God before me. You shall not make a carved image and bow down and serve it. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain and use my name like they would use these other gods' names to back them up and use it for different. And thus says Zarepta that the crops shall grow. And don't mention my name unless I've told you. Get my name out your mouth unless I have told you to say something or do something. Don't use my name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Remember there's one day where you do nothing. And Honor your father and mother that your days may be long. And how is that connected to idol worship and worshiping God? Because I'm going to instruct you through your mother and father. They may not be able to get their life together, but I'm going to give your mother and father special direction for you, and you better listen to them. Then he gives them 5 ways of treating other people. Some people might make it 4 and 6, but I like to put the honor thy father, my mother, up with the how we worship God. Anyway, do not murder. That's different. This will make you a peculiar nation, a royal priesthood. Don't murder. What? Other nations, you come and visit them, they murder you. Don't commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor, which they were always doing and stealing each other's property all the time. And you should not covet your neighbor's house. Don't try to take your neighbor's stuff. And if you do these things, that will make you different from everybody else. These are universal for all time. These 10 commandments, they're always true. They were always true. And we demonstrate our worship of God by how we treat other people. Jesus confirmed that these are the only 10 things in the Bible that are just will always be true. I don't have to say, well, sometimes I can murder if I'm kind of drunk or okay. Matthew 22, Jesus was just talking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, actually, the Sadducees who don't know the Bible. I don't even know why they're trying to attack Jesus. The Pharisees at least knew the Bible. They knew it wrong, but they knew the Bible. Sadducees didn't even know the Bible. Anyway, he just finished talking to the Sadducees. And in Matthew 22, verse 34, it says, but when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him and saying, teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? Now he'd given the 10, but then he'd given all these other little commandments that are about how to worship in the temple. And Jesus said to him, verse 37, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. Don't love all those other gods. If you can do that, then we're good. He says, and the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. These two things are connected. Of these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. These are the 2 things. That's why we divide the 10 commandments into 2. Love God, don't worship other gods, and then love your neighbor. And if you can do those 2 things, we're good. Everything else springs from that. Now, God went up in the mountain with Moses. When he came down, they'd already made a calf and had already started worshiping another god. So he says, okay, this worshiping other gods thing, this is a problem. Now, he wasn't shocked. He already knew what he was going to do. He told Moses while he was up in the mountain, when you go back down, you're going to have to build a tabernacle, and we're going to have to do all this. None of this was like, what? I can't believe they did that. I'm trying to. There we go. What? No, God already knew, right? So let me teach them how to worship me because they've had 200 years of worshiping idols. I've only been, yes, for 40 days they saw, it took 40 days for them to forget I had parted the Red Sea, to forget that I had fed them, and now they're already ready to build an idol and go back. They really don't believe that I am the Lord. And they have been so ingrained in this other worship. I've got to teach them how to worship me. So I'm going to build them a tabernacle and teach them how to worship me. But I've got to mostly break them of all the other things that they've learned. Those things are wrong. Now, they're not wrong for all time, you'll see. They're wrong. That's what the people were doing in these other countries and these other, you'll see. Okay. So I'm trying to retrain them. That's what the book of Leviticus is about. Let me retrain you. So the first 12, 13, 14 chapters, here's how you worship me. These other chapters are, and don't do what they are currently doing. So Leviticus chapter 19. Again, I'm going to teach 18 and 20 next week. Got to teach 19 first, because you won't believe what I'm saying about 18 and 20 until you read 19. Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy. For I, the Lord your God, am holy. How do you be? And that just means separate from everybody else, not doing all the crazy stuff they're doing. Every one of you shall revere his mother and father. Oh, look, that's one of the 10 commandments. He's reminding them because we've got 2 parts. Keep my Sabbaths. That's part of the 10 commandments. These are universal. I'm Lord your God. Do not turn to idols, nor make for yourselves molded gods. I am the Lord your God. Now he said this, I keep saying, I'm Lord your God. I'm just me. So don't make idols like they're doing. This is his concern. What is he going to be talking about? Idol worship. Do not make idols. Serve me. Love me. Verse 5. If you offer sacrifice of peace offering to the Lord, offer it of your own free will, because those other nations make you. He's always talking about because the other nations, but he doesn't have to write that every 5. He already told them, uh, let me build you this tabernacle so you can learn to worship me, and I'll make you a peculiar nation, different from everybody else. So we already know the context is how can you be different from everybody else? So he doesn't have to say that so that you'll be different from everybody else. Bring a peace offering. It's your own free will offering, so that you don't do, because they make them do it. They whip them and make them do it. Don't do that. It shall be eaten the same day you offer it, and the next day, if it remains until the third day, burn it up. Don't leave food sitting out. I forgot the third thing. Love your God, love your neighbor, and then I got to give you some dietary habits so that you don't die. Okay, if it's eaten on the third day, it's an abomination. It shall not be accepted. Don't wait. Don't just leave the food out. Therefore, anyone who eats it shall bear his iniquity, because he's profaned the hallowed offering of the Lord, and that person shall become. Bring a peace offering, eat it right then. Done. Okay. When you reap the harvest, verse 9, of your land, it says, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field. So when you reap your harvest, you're going to leave some extra. 10 Commandments. This is how you love me. This is how you worship me. This is how you love your neighbor. Nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. Don't gather every single bit, because verse 10 says, you shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather every grape of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. He keeps saying, I am the Lord your God. I mean, this is me talking. Leave some stuff for the poor. Help the poor. Remember, this is going to make you different from every other nation. It's because of how you treat the poor, how you treat your neighbor. You don't murder your neighbor. You don't rape your neighbor. You don't steal from your neighbor, and you help the poor, because these are connected. Because it's not enough just that I have this incredible relationship to God, but I hate people. No, you don't have an incredible relationship with God. That's why the Bible says, how can you say you love God who you've never seen, but you hate your neighbor who you see every day? No, you don't love me. You've created an idol that you worship that says, oh, it's okay if you hate that person. That's not me. I've said it's not okay. So loving me and how you treat your neighbor, they are connected, permanently connected for all time. Verse 11, you shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. So let me remind you, I'm not only teaching you how to worship, but the second part of it is how to treat other people. And you shall not swear by my name falsely, nor you should profane the name of your Lord your God. I am the Lord. This is just the 10 Commandments. He's repeating the 10 Commandments to them. Verse 13, you shall not cheat your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of him who is hired shall not remain with you all night until morning. If you hire somebody, pay them. Don't keep that money. You shall not curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind. Curse the deaf. Remember? Oh, he can't hear me, so I'm gonna say a bad thing to that deaf person because they can't hear me, or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, which was other nations thought, oh, you've been afflicted. Now we don't think this way, because thank goodness that the law that the Jews brought down to us and the Christians have passed on has changed the world. So we think it's cruel to treat people who are differently abled than us badly. We would think it terrible. If somebody tripped a blind person, we'd go, oh, that's terrible. They believed at that time this was written that blind people were being punished by God. The deaf people were being, so they would curse them, laugh at them, trip them, because, well, God's punishing you, so I'm punishing too. They had a whole different philosophy. He says, this will make you different. Don't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Don't make them fall over. Clearly other people were doing it. God's not crazy. God's not just inventing things. This is what other people were doing. But you shall fear the Lord, fear your God. I am the Lord. Verse 15, you shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor. So don't do injustice in judgment. And so he says, don't be partial to the poor, don't be partial to the rich. Be just. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. Be fair when you judge people. That's going to be differently because in those other cultures at that time, whoever had the most money, I know some people are saying, well, that's how our court is today. But anyway, whoever has the most money got the fairest treatment. If you were poor, you were treated badly. We've tried to enshrine it into our laws and we've tried to do the right thing. Okay. Verse 16, you shall not go about as a talebearer among your people. Don't lie, bear false witness, nor shall you take a stand against the life of your neighbor. I'm the Lord. Don't say something that's a lie that's going to cause your neighbor to lose his life. You shall not, verse 17, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. You should surely rebuke your neighbor, yes, but not bear sin because of him. So if your neighbor asks you to do something bad, you don't bear sin because of him. Like, ooh, hey, let's go ahead and burn that guy's house, and then we'll both take it. He said, don't bear sin because of him. Rebuke him if he asks you to do something bad. Because so God doesn't give the context because they all knew the context. The two of us should take that person's house. Well, the three of us should take those two people's house. Well, the eight of us should take those four people's houses. This was a normal occurrence. Survival of the fittest. God's like, don't do that. That was like normal. Hey, well, it happens on playgrounds and in prisons. Hey, let's pick on that little guy. The six of us will go jump that person and take their money. But before the law, this was the law. But before the Ten Commandments, treating your neighbor badly was like normal. It's like, well, of course, I'm stronger than him, and so of course I'm supposed to. I'm richer than him, so I take advantage. And it took a long time. I mean, going across and grabbing people from Africa and bringing them over to America and making them slaves, or grabbing people from this country and saying that. It's like, well, that's what you do. If you're the stronger, then you do that. You invade those countries, because I'm stronger than them. It's whoever the strongest is wins. And God's like, no, no, don't do that. This will make you different from other people. I'm zipping because I got to get to the important part. You should not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Now, he's been repeating the second part of the Ten Commandments, how to treat other people. Now he's about to remind us of the first part. This is how you worship me that will make you different from other nations. This is going to make you different from other people if you worship me in this way, because we know how the other people worship. And all of these references are specifically referring to the practices of other nations. It's the same thing in chapter 18 and in 20. But in 19, you'll be able to see it very easily. You'll go, oh, well, yeah, that makes logical sense. In 18 and 20, we will want to hold on to the old way it's been taught. Okay, in 19, he's going to explain, don't interbreed your animals, meaning don't make your dog breed with your cat. Now, he has to say this because that's what they would do. Don't make your cow breed with your pig. He had to say this because that's what other nations were doing. He didn't have to say, though, in the fine print, because that's what other nations are doing. He just has to say it. Verse 19 says, you shall keep my statutes. You will not let your livestock breed with another kind. Now, here's the next thing he's about to say. You shall not sow your field with mixed seed, nor shall a garment of mixed linen and wool come upon you. So, he is teaching them, I need you to learn to be separate for a long time period from other people. I need you to not mix races. I need you to not mix religions, because you are just now learning me. And these other cultures have been doing the wrong thing for thousands of years. And we've only had one day of me giving you these commandments. So they're going to influence you, which they did all throughout the Bible. God would say something, and 2 days later, they would do exactly the opposite because of another nation had influenced them. So he says, I need you to stay separate. This was not unlike the Ten Commandments. This was not a for all time kind of rule. This is specifically for the Israelites at this time so that they can learn the law. And then later, God told them, now go out to all nations and go out and spread and mix. And now that you've had 1,000 years of learning the law separate from other nations, you can go out and mix. And I know when I first got to high school, I was very easily influenced by other people because I hadn't really, I mean, I had read the Bible in church and at vacation Bible school and Sunday school, but I hadn't studied. And I ran into kids who would say, well, you know, the Bible says this, and the Bible says, I go, what? Really? Oh, I didn't know that. And then finally, I started studying for myself. And the thing that, and it was a wonderful thing. I heard some wrong theology where they said Jesus is coming back at any minute. Any minute. He will be the world's going to end by 1988 because Israel had became a nation in 1948 and a generation is 40 years and the generation that sees Israel become a nation and that happened in 1948 will also see the return of Jesus. So that's in 1988. In this 1975, I'm in high school, it's 1975. I thought, oh my God, I've got 13 years. Jesus is going to be back. I've got to get all my friends saved. Now that was wrong theology, but it made me want to read the Bible and really, really, really study. And then I found out how influenced I had been by these other friends because I didn't really know the Bible that well. So when I had all these other friends say, well, you know, the Bible says this, the Bible says that, you can't believe this, I would think, well, yeah, I guess you're right. But so I separated myself, learned the Bible, studied. There's a whole period where I separated myself. Then I was able to talk to all my friends. Then they were sorry because now I had studied. And I went on a tear. I'm gonna get this person saved and that person saved and this person. Me and my friend Sue, we want to get everybody saved on earth, you know. And so um, this is what God is telling to the children of Israel. You got to have a period where you're separating yourself. So he's teaching them don't mix. Just in general principle, don't mix animals together. And obviously, you don't interbreed animals ever. But he's saying don't mix um, your seed. When you said you should not sow your field with mixed seed. Don't grow grapes next to strawberries. Don't grow the oranges next to. Don't. I just don't. I want you to have a mindset of not mixing. He says, nor shall you a garment of mixed linen and wool come upon you. Well, let's talk about this one. The priests, the Israelite priests, wore garments of mixed wool and linen. In Exodus chapter 39, verse 1, it says, and of the blue, purple, and scarlet thread, they made garments of ministry. They made it out of wool for ministering in the holy place and made holy garments for Aaron, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Verse 5 of Exodus 39 says, and the intricately woven band of his ephod that was on it was the same workmanship woven of gold, blue, purple, and scarlet thread, that's wool, and of fine woven linen, as the Lord had commanded. So they wore garments of wool and linen. He's telling the people, don't you try to be priest. Don't wear garments of wool and linen. This was not a law for all time. He had designed garments specifically that the priests were going to wear during this time period. Now, there is no more a temple where sheep are being sacrificed and goats are being sacrificed. Jesus was the high priest. So we're not worried about that anymore. We can wear wool and linen. But he's telling the people, you know, I've designed this garment for the priest. Don't dress like them. Don't try to be a priest, which they still did. Don't be in your home and try to be a priest and try to do a sacrifice. Because remember, he said, if you do a sacrifice, bring that blood to the temple and let the priest take care of it. He didn't want people off on their own, doing their own little things, because then that's how you get led astray. And every time they got led astray, it was because of this very thing, right? Because they would sit and do crazy stuff and they wouldn't follow the law and God would have to come and judge them. This was not you can never wear wool and linen for all time thing. This is specifically don't dress like the priests. then he would say, um, and this was just a general rule of not mixing things, because he's trying to teach them to be separate for a long time period until you can thoroughly learn my law enough that when other people come to you from other nations and say, hey, you know how to get close to God? Let's go and sacrifice this child, that you will say, no, the law doesn't say that. I've studied. But that's not what they did. They didn't separate themselves. And when somebody came and said, hey, let's sacrifice our children, they would do it. Some of them would do it. Let's burn our children in the fire. Okay, that sounds good to me. So he's teaching them generally don't mix. Not for all time. Obviously not for all time, because later he said, please go on, mix races, mix people, mix everything. This was not a rule for all time. This was specifically for this time period. In 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, Paul is still explaining the principle of not mixing until you are strong enough. It says, verse 14, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Unequally. If you know the Bible backwards and forwards, go around as many unbelievers as you want. Jesus was around unbelievers. Everybody, Jesus knew was an unbeliever. Jesus ate with sinners, but he wasn't afraid that the sinner was going to influence him. God was like, "Ooh, I hope Jesus doesn't get, fooled." Don't be unequally. If you know the Bible backwards and forth, if you don't know what you're talking about, you got to be careful around sinners, because they will influence you to do crazy stuff, and you're not strong enough. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? What communion has light with darkness? Now, if the light's strong enough, it'll drive out the darkness. But if the light is weak, little candle, the darkness is going to swallow that light. So you got to be careful. What accord has Christ with Belial? Right? What part has the believer with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? Stop mixing. You go to the temple of God one day, and the next day you're going to the temple of Baal. And that's why you're confused. Don't do that. And Paul is writing to new believers in the church at Corinth. He's not new believers. He's just saying you've got to have a time period where you're by yourself. As God said, I will dwell in them, I'll walk among them, I will be their God, and they will be my people. Therefore, come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean. I will receive you. I will be the father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. This is God saying, hey, you brand new believers in Corinth, you brand new believers in the book of Romans, which we'll talk about next week. Paul was talking to a culture that was thoroughly into idols and all kind of crazy stuff. He was not giving a general rule for all time. You in that specific situation, that's why there are scriptures that are descriptive and prescriptive. Some are simply describing a situation, and we got to read them in context. Some of them are prescriptive, meaning here's this prescription that will heal you. So you got to know the context of the scripture. So he's teaching them the concept of not mixing things, right? You got to be separate. This is like a new concept to them. Okay, back to Leviticus. I call this, don't sleep with your friend's slave. Verse 20, whoever lies carnally with a woman who is betrothed to a man as a concubine. Now, here's what's so interesting. The man has, here's my concubine. They would sell their daughters to pay their debts. This is not a good thing. So let's say you've done that. You've sold your daughter to pay your debt, and so, okay, this is now my concubine. I own this woman but then somebody else, and usually they were a lot older, and you would sell your 12-year-old, 13-year-old daughter. She'd worked them until she was 18. And the promise was, well, once she becomes 18, then she can become one of your wives. Don't touch her. But once she's 18, and 21, somewhere at some point, she can become one of your wives. We don't have that practice today. But somebody who was her age would come and sleep with her once she turned 18, I hope. And but not the person who had owned her. Whoever lies carnally with a woman who's betrothed to a man as a concubine. So that's my concubine. I own her. And who has not at all been redeemed or given her freedom. Because at a certain point, she's free. And then, but while she's my concubine, You still owe me the money that she's paying off. You gave her to me to be my maid, and in order to pay off your debt. She's not free yet. So she says she's not been redeemed, not given her freedom. For this, there'll be a scourging. You'll be in trouble. But they should not be put to death because she was not free. It's different if she was free. She was the, okay. So this is crazy. Obviously, this is a very specific situation. This is not, and for all time. So as we read through chapter 19, you'll go, okay, these are very specific situations that God's dealing with. This is not like the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. We know that's for all time. These are very specific, okay? He shall bring his trespass offering to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, blah, blah, blah. The priest shall make atonement for him, verse 22. Okay, verse 23. I call this, the earth is mine. Don't do the crazy stuff that they do in order to get the land, the crops to grow. Don't do those other nations. Now, he doesn't say don't do what other nations do. He's already said it. He says, when you come into the land and have planted all kinds of trees for food, then you shall count their fruit as uncircumcised. 3 years it shall be as uncircumcised. You don't touch it. It shall not be eaten. Let the land, when I bring you to new land and you start to grow food, don't eat that fruit yet. It's not good for you yet. Wait until the land has has become richer and the soil become richer. They're dying off because they're doing stuff too fast. Don't do what they do. But in the 4th year, all of fruit shall be holy, a praise to the Lord. Okay, now the land, you don't have to worry that you're eating bad stuff. And in the 5th year, you may eat its fruit, that it may yield to you its increase. I'm Lord your God. This is not negotiable. Verse 26, you should not eat anything with blood, just to remind you. Now, again, that's because in their rituals in other countries, they would literally drink the blood. I'm going to kill this animal so I can drink the blood. I'm going to kill this animal so I can pour this blood on the ground. So don't do that. We know that this is not for all time. And again, because we pick and choose the scriptures that we decide are for all time and aren't for all time, but we should not do this. The whole section here is not, none of this is for all time. The whole section. This doesn't mean, well, you can't eat your steak medium rare. They were doing it for the wrong reasons. Don't do it for the reasons that they're doing it. Anything is a sin if you're doing it for the wrong reason. Jesus said that prayer can be a sin if you're praying for the wrong reason. And he gave an example of 2 men went to the temple to pray, and one stood up and said, I thank you, I'm not like other men. I'm not greedy. I'm dishonest. I thank you that I pay my tax. So he's praying out loud in order to get praise from men. Jesus says that's a sin. But it's prayer, but it's a sin if you're doing it for the wrong reason. He gave an example of people who were giving. He says, this woman who only gave a little bit, she was actually obeying me. This person who gave all that money, that doesn't mean anything to me. That was a sin because that person gave so he can announce it with trumpets and to impress everybody. Giving can be anything is a sin if it's for the wrong reason. So God is interested in the reason why you're doing something. It can look holy, and something that somebody else might think is bad. God says, I know why you're doing that, so I'm not going to just send you to hell for it. So we're like, oh, that person did that. God's looking at the heart. That's why he says, don't you judge, because you don't know what's going on in that person's heart. I know what's going on in a person's heart. So I decide if something is good or bad. You don't get to decide that. So don't eat anything with blood. This is very specific because they were just biting chickens and drinking their blood, to appease their gods. So don't do that. It's in that context. This is not for all time. You can never eat anything with blood. Don't talk to spirits. He says, you shall not eat anything with blood, nor shall you practice divination or soothsaying. Don't do that. Don't shave your beard. Wait, what? You can never shave? Verse 27, you shall not shave around the sides of your head, nor shall you disfigure the edges of your beard. So this means you can never shave. Now, for some reason, people don't, again, we pick and choose. Because there's a verse in chapter 18, there's a verse in chapter 20, you're going to say, no, applies for all time. But you know this doesn't. You know people can shave. You know God's not sending people to help people shaving. Their priests in Babylon and in Egypt, They would do these special designs in their beard, do all this stuff in order to appease their gods. They would also cut themselves and do all sorts of stuff in order to appease their gods. And so God says, don't do that because that's what they do. Not like you can never do it for all time. You can never shave your beard. He's trying to rid them of the practices that they've been seeing. In verse 28, you shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo any marks on you. I'm the Lord. You can't get a tattoo. You're going to go have, no, well, no, not for all time. They would carve and mutilate themselves to look like their gods. They would cut themselves to look like people, to make these designs so they can become priests to their gods and cut, oh my, he's the goat god, and they would tattoo this worship on their body and stuff like that. In that context, you cannot do it. But that's like saying you can't pray because Jesus says you can't go to the temple and pray. No, he meant in that context. You can't pray in order to impress people, but you can pray. This is, you can't drink blood. Well, in that context, if you do it, you can't get a tattoo in this context. No one's going to hell because they got a tattoo, unless they're doing it in that kind of context. They're doing it in order to prove that they worship the devil or something. You know, it's the context of it. And you know that. You know that in these verses. Don't sell your daughter into prostitution. Verse 29, do not prostitute your daughter to cause her to be a harlot, lest the land fall into harlotry and the land become full of wickedness. Because they would give their daughters, ooh, guess what you get to be, daughter, and you have no choice? You get to be a temple prostitute. And then the men will come and have sex with you, but it'll be like they're having sex to God. There's some ministers of today who've said that to young women. Anyway, they would sell their daughters to the temple, and then the money that they got, because you still pay, they would take that money and hand it to the priest, and that's how they would pay for their temples and stuff like that. Don't do that. Reverence God's sanctuary. Verse 30, you shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. I'll just call these, don't get possessed by false gods. Verse 31, give no regard to mediums and familiar spirits. Do not seek after them to be defiled by them. I'm the Lord your God. Because that's what they would do. You shall rise, don't mistreat the elderly. Verse 32, you shall rise before the gray-headed and honor the presence of an old man and fear your God. I am the Lord. They would, oh, you're old now. Just like they would make fun, and they literally would make fun of the blind and the deaf because they thought, you're being punished by God. And they would treat them horribly. They would do the same thing to the elderly at a certain, well, you're of no use now, blah, 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 right? Don't do that. Well, we shouldn't, this is a good one just to not do, period. I don't know that there's a good context to make fun of old people, but, you know, I guess you can make fun of your grandfather as a joke or something if you guys have a, you know, you can't make fun of me because the Bible says you're going to go to hell. Well, he's in this specific context because that's what they would do to their elderly. Don't mistreat strangers. Verse 33, and if a stranger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. In this context. Now, it doesn't mean, oh, good, I can mistreat strangers in other contexts. It means they specifically would, oh, you're new here? You're a slave now. Hey, welcome. We're going to kill you. Come on in. Let me rape you real quick and then put you to work in my fields. That's just how they would do, like the newbie at a prison yard, like we do today. Oh, look, the newbies are here. Let's get them. It's a cultural thing. And he's saying, you want to be different from all other people? Actually love the strangers and the people who come to your land. That will make you different. I need to show that you're different from everybody else. Verse 35, you shall do no injustice in judgment, in measurement of length and weight and volume. Don't lie and say, oh, this property costs, it's really 900 feet and costs millions of dollars when it really only costs $500. Do not do injustice in judgment in measurement of length, weight, or volume. Oh, this liquid here, yeah, it weighs 50 pounds, so that's going to cost. Don't lie to people about how much things weigh and how large they are in order to cheat them. You shall have honest scales, honest weights, an honest ephah, that's a little measuring cup, and an honest hin. Okay, these are just measurements. I'm Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Verse 37, and I'm almost done. Therefore, you shall observe all my statutes and all my judgments, perform them. I am the Lord. So he's giving you a list of stuff that obviously we know you can trim your beard today. We know that you can have a medium steak. There's stuff that's obviously we know that it was applying to those specific people because the other people were doing them for wrong reasons. And he has to say, don't do them at all. Just don't do them at all, you know? And it's like your child, take my hand whenever you cross the street. Take my hand whenever you cross the street. So at a certain point, you know how to cross the street. You know how to look both ways. It no longer applies. You don't have to go grab your mother when you're 30 so you can cross the street and then, okay, mom, I'll drive you back home, but I needed to cross the street just now. Because now you know how to do it. It's for that specific. There are laws you give your kids, you know, that because if you don't train them to brush after every meal or brush it, they're not going to do it at all. And then, but now at they get a certain age, they know how to moderate that and how to do that and when to do it and not to do it. And, you know, and so these are specific. It's the same thing in 18. It's the same thing in 20. These are very specific because of things that were going on right then. Now, in Deuteronomy, just so that we know, I'm just going to read this to you because I can say whatever I want and well, how do we know it's true? So once they're about to leave the land, God reminds them of how specific I want you to follow the Ten Commandments for all time, but be careful about this idolatry stuff. Only take heed for yourself, Deuteronomy 4, chapter 9, and diligently keep yourself. Guard yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. And teach them to your children and your grandchildren, especially concerning the day you stood before the Lord your God in Horeb. And the Lord said to me, gather the people to me, and I will let them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, that they may teach their children. Remember that day I was stood in the mountain, and I gathered you all, and he gave the Ten Commandments? Somehow you're going to forget that. Do not forget the Ten Commandments because it's what's going to make you a peculiar people. Verse 11, then you came near and you stood at the foot of the mountain, remember? And the mountain burned with fire in the midst of heaven with darkness and cloud and thick darkness. And the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire, and you heard the sound of the words, but saw no form. You heard only a voice. Remember that there was no form. He says, so he declared to you in his covenant, which he commanded you to perform the Ten Commandments. And he wrote them on the 2 tablets of stone. So those are the forever laws. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. These other things he gave were specifically for that time period and how to worship him. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments that you might observe them in the land which you cross over to possess. Remember that day? So, verse 15, this is Deuteronomy 4. Take careful heed for yourselves. For you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb, that's Mount Sinai, out of the midst of the fire, lest you act corruptly and make for yourself a carved image in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female. Be careful that you don't just run and start making idols again, because that's my concern. That's what the book of Leviticus is about. Yes, remember I gave the 10 Commandments, but I'm really concerned about your idol worship because you go back to it so quickly. So don't make the form of any male or female, verse 17, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, or the likeness of any fish that is in the water beneath the earth. Let me be very specific, he's saying. None of it. Stop making idols. Take heed lest you lift your eyes up to heaven, and when you see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the host of heaven, and you feel driven to worship them and serve them, don't worship the sun. Because he's warning you. You fall so quickly into this because every other nation does it. You're the only nation that's going to be different. So it's going to be easy for you to fall into the other habits. So that's why I have to describe these other nations' habits to you and warn you about them. But the Lord has taken you, verse 20, and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be his people, an inheritance as you are this day. So here's the forever laws as I close. The 10 Commandments, love the Lord your God with all your heart, love your neighbor. That will never change. Jesus says they're summed up, though, in love. I made a short version of the 10 Commandments by giving you 2. And then I'm going to write those on your heart. That's going to make you different from everybody. These other things in the book of Leviticus are very specific warnings. Don't shave your beard like the other people do and try to be like them. Don't drink blood like they don't put tattoos. But they were specifically in that situation. Once you have been separate, then yeah, you can get a tattoo if you want because you know that you're not doing it because you think that it's going to get you closer to the god Asheroth. You're not having a medium rare steak because you think that it's going to make the land more fertile. So he's looking at your reasoning, your motivation. Why are you doing it? Right now, I'm saying don't do it at all because you can't separate the two. Later, I'm going to tell you, yeah, you're not under the law. Don't worry about that. I'll write the law in your heart. And maybe I'll say, don't order a steak today because what you don't know is you're about to get food poisoning. I'm going to write it on your heart. I'll lead you that way. So there may be times that you do something or don't do something, but that's personal between us. But for now, he's telling the children of Israel in the book of Leviticus, don't do any of this stuff. Later, I'll let you do it, and I'm not worried about it. Same thing in 18, same thing in 20. Be a very interesting lesson next week. So thank you so much for tuning in. And on Wednesdays, we are in the book of Luke. All right. No bowl cuts. These people are funny. Okay. Well, that's true. Well, I know, but it depends on your reasoning. I've seen some people get tattoos that say "I love Jesus." Not for me. Maybe that works for them, but you're not going to go to hell because of it. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week. All right. Bye bye.